All right, and we are just about at 5 o'clock. We have a nice crowd going. I'm going to ask that anyone who's participating in the conversation, if you could please turn your camera on and be ready to unmute when you have a question or if there's something you want to respond to. This is going to be an interactive conversation, so we are looking forward to your participation, and it will go as long as an hour or as short as nobody has any questions left. So it's really driven by you. And we want to thank everybody for joining us today. I think this is a wonderful turnout for short notice, holiday weekend, and all those good things. So we appreciate all of you being here with us today. And we're really going to kick it off. Well, I'll introduce myself because I haven't met a couple of you in person. I'm Renee Hirschberg. I've lived in Eastman for 4 years now, and 4 years this month. So, and I have been, this is my third year chairing the nominating committee. There are a couple members of the nominating committee on the call with us today. Lisa Miller, who I'm pointing is down on my bottom right, and Gail Boyce, who's on my bottom left as well. So thank you to them for all of their help too. But really what we're here today is to hear from our board members, and we have Bill Mattson, who's the president of the board, and Rick Koresh has also joined us, who's on the board as well, and can, I'm sure, offer some great insights too. But our goal today is to answer all of the questions that you may have about the board and what it means to serve on the board. And Bill, I think we're just going to start off with a softball of, if you had to explain in 3 minutes or less what it means to serve on the bill, how would you describe to serve on the board, not on the bill, but how would you explain it?
Okay, well, the clock's running. First, thank you all for taking time out this afternoon. It is terrific to see the interest. I would say that to start, it's important to understand a little bit about how Eastman works from a governance standpoint. There are two main decision-making bodies, the board and the council, and then the third leg of the stool is the staff. So the council in Eastman is kind of Eastman's answer to the traditional New England town hall meeting. For big issues, we bring representatives from the communities together to contemplate those issues and to opine on the direction that we ought to take as a community. The staff has all the day-to-day responsibilities for managing things here in Eastman and keeping this the great place that we are fortunate enough to live in. The board's responsibility is between those two. We have fiduciary responsibility, so we are kind of the trustees of the community. We also have responsibility for overall strategy and policy. So on a month-by-month basis, we meet. We spend time talking about issues. We try not to get too involved in the operational aspects because that's the staff's role, although we'll give direction on the overall approach that we hope they would take. And we also listen closely to what the council says on issues like the overall governance, like the declaration of covenants and restrictions, or issues like spending lots of money on a maintenance center or the center project that we had about 10 years ago. So that is an overview of what the board does. And as Renee and you all ask questions, we can fill in around those blanks.
Great, thanks, Bill. And I will just ask that if you have a question, please click on reactions and click the little raise hand button. And if that doesn't work for you, just raise your hand and we'll get you in there. So Bill, the question we get the most is about the time commitment required of the board. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'm watching the number of participants. If I answer a question wrong, it'll go down, and maybe if we answer a question right, it'll go down because people start filling out their board packages. It depends an awful lot on the role that you have on the board. I would say for the typical board member, you're probably talking about between 10 and 20 hours a month in terms of a time commitment. That includes the time you spend in board meetings. All board members also have some committee assignments that they take responsibility for. All board members are liaisons to special places, so we ask them to attend the quarterly special place meetings that happen in many parts of our community. And all board members actually have responsibility for being liaisons with other committees in the community, like common properties or woodlands and wildlife. So they can be a conduit for questions they have that would be along with the board and the overall policy implications. If you add all of that up, that comes into that 10 to 20 hours a month range. If you take on a leadership position in the board, obviously it would be a bit more than that. During the pandemic, when we're changing restaurants and general managers, it was a pretty intensive job. I wouldn't lie to you about that. During normal times, from a leadership standpoint, it's probably more in the 10 to 20 hours a week kind of position. But that's, again, for the president's role. I think vice president and treasurer would be substantially less than that.
Rick, do you want to maybe comment on the treasurer role and what it looks like for you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, I agree with Bill very much that this is variable. Some board members attend board meetings, exercise their responsibility there, and have a couple of committee liaison assignments. Others take a lot of work on their shoulders. So I think that that is a choice that's possibly open to anybody who comes on the board. Treasurer. Man, if you read the official description, one of the first roles of treasurer is to oversee the daily receipt and outflow of monies. And that's crazy because I don't do that at all. We are incredibly blessed to have our CFO, Brian Harding, 18 years here with Eastman. He is absolutely rock solid and a foundation. So that leaves the role of treasurer to be thinking about the long-term stability and sustainability of the association. And I feel like I've been able to contribute some important things in that way, and I'm not sure what else to say. Requires a bit of financial savvy, but on the other hand, we're not doing the bookkeeping. We're not doing the daily stuff. The treasurer also has to sign large checks, which is interesting sometimes. I think I'll leave it at that.
It's fun. You can spend lots of money and it doesn't come out of your checking account. So
that's always fun. Everyone likes to do that.
It has enabled me to sign larger checks than I've ever, actually, no, not quite. When I was CFO of the company that I started back way years ago, but it enables me to sign a big check every once in a while. It's kind of fun.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Are there any questions yet from any of you? I could fire off a few more, but I'd love to hear if anybody has anything they're specifically wondering about at this point. Jackie?
Yeah, so I've heard talk both ways about whether or not things are going to stay hybrid or go back to being only in person. And so my question's kind of related to that, mainly for the board meetings. And I know individual committees may or may not adhere to one standard or the other. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jackie. We are working on a plan that would take us to a hybrid model. I suspect that for the most part, when people can, they'll want to come to the board meeting in person if they're a member of the board. But we have really enjoyed the opportunity to engage people from across the community, and we've had a lot more people attending the board meetings when we've had the Zoom format. So we actually demoed a very cool technology that was relatively inexpensive that allows you to have a camera in the room that will move around to the people who are sitting around the table. We can project up on the wall the folks who are not there in person, including from time to time board members, that would allow us to be able to deploy that hybrid model. We also think that model has merit for the work that's being done by many of the committees. What's less clear is if you think about a group the size of the council as to whether it could work for that, but we continue to look for opportunities to make that happen as well. The pandemic has brought us some good things, like the fact that we could have this kind of meeting on relatively short notice and get good participation. We all know that a big part of that is it's just convenient. You can log on and be able to participate.
Yep, and I don't have to worry about childcare. because my kids can be downstairs, killing each other, and I can still be up here and be engaged.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly right.
I do get nervous at times. One of our board members, Becca Swope, has children, and she'll be preparing dinner, and I keep saying, be careful of that knife. Don't chop your thumb off while you're on the Zoom call.
Yep.
Great question. Thanks, Jackie. Any other questions at this moment, or shall I keep going on?
I guess I would pile on to that question with just a little bit about when the board meets. When I joined the board, we used to meet on Saturday mornings. That was really convenient for some and not so much for others who wanted to travel or had family commitments on the weekends. We have avoided having meetings during the day because we know that that is not convenient for members of the community that might want to Zoom in and see what we're up to. We have settled in on 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, the third Wednesday of each month. That allows people who work the opportunity to participate. But one of the very first things we do in every board term is to kind of poll the board and see what works in terms of everybody's schedule to come up with a date that is convenient for the board. We're mindful of the staff who have already worked an 8-hour day, so we're trying not to keep them any later than we have to. And we also want to give people in the community a chance to participate as well.
And I'll just add, I think we have a commitment to make the timing work for the people who are assembled to be the board each session.
That's great. And I will say that, since COVID, I actually never attended a board meeting before COVID and the virtual meetings, and it's made it possible for me to attend. I probably about a 75% attendance rate at this point. So it's been really wonderful.
We had really high attendance early in the pandemic. I think part of that was people being interested in what we were doing to respond to it. And then part of it was that Netflix really hadn't updated their catalogs to make enough alternative programming.
It's wrong. So Tiger King was in its prime at that point in time. So
okay.
Everybody just had already watched it. So all right. So I think Bill and maybe Rick as well, it would be helpful to hear what are some of the more difficult pieces. So if somebody comes to you and says they're interested in running for the board, what's kind of one of the buyer beware things that makes it a little more difficult, and countering that with what's your very favorite thing about being on the board as well?
Well, I would start by saying it's always important to think about why people want to be on the board. There are some people who want to be on the board that probably, if you look at the roles and responsibilities, want to be on the staff. I mean, they want to take on an operational role to run the community. And it's really important to remember that isn't the board's role. The board's role is to set policy. The board's role is to kind of define the strategic direction. But on a day-to-day basis, if West Cove Beach is going to be open or not, or where we're putting boat racks, those are not things that the board involves itself in, and rightfully so. One of the more difficult things is you'll have people that'll come up to you and say, well, I want you to fix the parking problem in North Cove, particularly since I live in North Cove. And that's really not what we're about. We'll communicate back to the staff that this is an issue we're hearing about, but we have a terrific staff and we need to trust them to be able to take on that set of responsibilities. Rick, what would be on your list?
Wow, that's a good question. I think one of the primary roles as a board member, you see, our job, our pretty much solemn obligation is to take actions and make votes based upon the overall interest of the community. And it's something that I take very seriously. I think all of our board members take very seriously. That means putting aside personal preferences sometimes. I will comment that I think one of the things that's really important for a board member is a cool enough head to engage in sometimes contentious issues and still stay in there with each other, so that our board doesn't devolve to be like national politics of a continuous slugfest. Bill and I are close friends. we work in high alignment most of the time. And from time to time, there are issues that divide us. Occasionally, you and I have come close to yelling at each other. And yet, you know, what's important is to hang in there and get through the riffraff and down to what really matters.
Yeah, I would just pile on to that,
Yeah.
it's interesting if you look at board votes, and you can look at the minutes to see them. In the time for the president, the only time I vote is if there's a 4-4 tie. I think in the entire time I've been on the board, I voted twice on an issue.
Oh, I thought it was once.
Yeah, well,
Anyway.
there's one more. Anyway,
Okay.
the interesting aspect of that is we spend a lot of time as a board wrestling with issues and working to a point where there is a very, very strong consensus in what we want to do. That takes a little bit more time, not only in the board meetings, but sometimes in the emails that go back and forth. We don't all start in the same place, but we invest the time that's necessary to get there. And I think that produces better answers for the community. In fact, if I think back, Rick and I joined the board in a different generation when there was a lot of contention, both in the community and on the board. And we both ran on a platform that said we really wanted to work to bring the community together. And I am most proud of the fact that this is a board that really works hard to try and find the best answers. And those are reflected in the votes that you see on most of these issues. That's when it's fun to be on board.
I agree with that. You know, the lesson I've learned from 40 odd years here is that we can really do monumental things and make monumental changes, but you got to do it slowly enough so that you do it by building consensus. The way I think the wheels come off is when somebody tries to make something that's a radical change and do it fast, because that'll produce verbal fistfights. And you just gotta be willing to keep talking, keep the idea flowing. If it's a good idea, it will expand and engage more people. It takes some time.
And keep listening, both to each other on the board and also to the community as a whole.
It's a lot of change management theory there.
A little bit.
Yeah. Lisa.
Yeah, my question was what the culture has been, recently on the board with regards to expressing disagreement. And I was sort of looking at very, for like specific examples. And I was thinking, if you could give an example of somebody who you feel like has done a particularly good job at expressing disagreement or surfacing, hard issues, the elephant in the room, without while maintaining the relationships that, are necessary to get to consensus eventually.
Well, let me take a contemporary issue. Most of you know, and this is a little plug, I guess, that we're going to do a questionnaire that goes out on Thursday of this week on the recommendations that came forward from the Forest Working Group. There were a lot of discussions about this questionnaire. Were we stepping on the council's toes? Why would we question the work that was done by a committee? How did we want to handle this? What questions would be asked? And, I think we started as a board with some very important discussions, some of them in person, a lot of those via email, on what are we trying to accomplish and how do we want to try and accomplish that the right way. I think throughout all of it, people were very, very good about listening and thinking about what the implications were of what we were trying to do. And most importantly, staying patient as we went from an idea to actual words on a page so people could see what the questionnaire looked like, to say, well, yeah, that probably is a good idea. It's always a good idea to collect feedback from owners. And the idea morphed, and we started to think about, well, how do we do that in a way that respects the special places? And one of the answers to that is, well, we give the information back to the special places. So as they have their meetings in advance of the council meeting in September, they can talk about the data, not only from the people that are in the meeting, but the people who responded to the survey from their special place. So a lot of good discussion where people might have started in different places, but there was a common objective that everybody had to try and engage the community in coming up with a good answer. And if you start from a place where people have a common sense of the fact that we're trying to make the community better, I'm convinced that you can always come up with a good consensus around the tactics that get you there.
That's great. Thank you. George, you're up.
You're
You're
muted,
muted.
George.
So, Bill, I know the last 12 months or so, maybe a little bit more, you fixed the restaurant, you got a new general manager, you waded through a pandemic, so you've had some unusual events. If you look over the next 12 to 24 months, what do you think is going to occupy the board's attention?
It's a great question. I would tell you I had a lot more hair, and it wasn't gray when we started all this, and I owe it. I jinxed myself because when I was thinking about running for a second term, I was talking to my wife and I said, I don't think there's anything all that significant on the horizon. And then all the things you mentioned came up. The good news, by the way, is there's a terrific group of folks that helped on each of those issues. So it's easy to do some good things when you've got good talent around you. When I look forward to the next 3 to 5 years, I think there are going to be the ongoing issues of continuing to help the general manager grow and gain experience. So supporting him in his role. He's fortunate to have a very stable and terrific senior staff that does a lion's share of that as well. I think we are still working our way back from the pandemic. Some of the things, the surface things are easy. Some of the other elements, though, like how do you get a restaurant staffed up to be able to handle events again, are harder. And trying to assist them and the general manager in thinking through that will be important. From a financial standpoint, better than anyone, George is the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee, that we are very fortunate right now to be in a very strong position financially. How do you manage through that? What does that mean in terms of the monies that we collect for operations in the future? Should we reduce it? We certainly don't want to spend more money just because we have it. We have a number of capital things that are coming up that we need to sort our way through and make sure that we are never in a position where we have a surprise for our owners where we have to have a special assessment. So I don't see any major things on the horizon. I see a lot of the normal activities, but what I've learned the hard way is that sometimes the crystal ball gets kind of foggy. Rick, would you add into that? What do you see?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Foggy crystal ball. So George, what's on my mind is that there's been a tremendous changeover in Eastman in terms of our physical assets and a few other things, some governance changes and so forth in the last, 15 years or so. We inherited the developer quality facilities and buildings, and starting with South Cove and the center and then the maintenance complex, we brought them up to the standard that we wanted. I think it's very clear to me as treasurer, we know our agenda for the next few years, and we've got the resources and wherewithal and talent to handle the things that are coming in the next few years. But if you start looking, I think one of the questions for us is to start thinking a little further out. And what are the things that are going to be landing? What are the things that we're going to want and need to do 6, 7, and 8 years out from now? That's harder to see. And I think the board's going to have a role in that. The Capital Improvements Committee, of course, gets first shot at that. Things bubble up from the committees and so forth. But, all that process is much clearer in the first 3 years than it is in years 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I think thinking about what kinds of things we're going to want to or need to do a little further out is a key thing for the board.
Great. Thank you both. All right. Are there any other questions for Bill and Rick? And don't feel like you have to hold back. Feel free to ask whatever you like. And if not, then we will give everybody a little bit of their evening back. Oh, what's that? You're
I'm
not done?
sure just yet. No,
All
no, we
right,
need more
let's-
questions than that. We can't
all
have
right.
a number of people
Me neither.
on the phone and not get more questions. So,
Well, I'll ask a question of the whole audience, and Bill, you too. What are the key things that we're looking for in board members? What are the key? You know, if this were hiring in a company, it would be competencies, but it's not quite competencies. What are the characteristics that we're looking for in members of the board? And I just invite in, you know, all of the listeners here, the participants, to do. And Bill, why don't you and I hang back and see what people think?
this would be the audience participation part of the program. Come
I
on,
can
Jackie,
go.
you got something, go.
Thanks, Jackie.
So it's kind of the low hanging fruit. I would say probably a diverse set of individuals, you know, a mix of people who live here all the time versus people who are maybe a little bit newer. I still kind of half consider myself, even though this is year 3, I still consider myself kind of a newcomer in relation to everybody. But yeah, a mix of people who have been here for a while, new people, people who are here all the time, people with kids, people who are retired, you know, second home, you know, just to kind of get the viewpoint, even from the board standpoint of, you know, being able to, I don't want to say represent, but represent, you know, kind of their group at Eastman, just to kind of be able to hear everybody's voices, since it's not the council where you have so many people who kind of then represent their special place. It's a very small group of people who are having this discussion. And then the other thing would be is, you know, engagement, you know, and in a good way, having an opinion of wanting to make sure that Eastman is a wonderful place to live. So, yeah.
I think that is spot on. You know, it's funny. I've talked to some people that said, well, you know, I haven't lived here that long. I'm not sure that I know enough about the community yet to be able to contribute. I joined the board, I think it was no more than 3 years after we moved to Eastman. I had served on a committee, so I had a little bit of a sense of some of the things that were going on, but I didn't come with a wealth of experience as far as what had happened here 10, 20 years ago. It's helpful that we have that perspective. You know, Rick brings a whole different set of experiences and a sense of things. And those two perspectives are very helpful to have in contrast, because they help to frame issues in different ways. Similar thing, Becca Swope has a family, has a job. So the perspectives that she brings would be very different than the perspective that Judy Platt would bring, who's retired and lives in a condo, which, by the way, is another important perspective to have. So, you know, if you're out doing the work of central casting, you are trying to find people who bring a diverse set of experiences, both in terms of time here, what they do when they're not in board meetings. And that's what makes for a much better set of decisions and richer discussions as a group.
Absolutely. George, did I see you on mute as well, or no?
Actually, I think that was me that was raising my hand.
Oh, sorry, Vince.
That's all right. So I want to echo what Jackie said, and I think that the diverse viewpoints is an important factor in that, as well as, I guess, the commitment to Eastman. You know, if you've got people who are just moving here because they've taken a job up at Dartmouth for 2 years, you know, are they here for the long run when it comes to Eastman? So wanting to do things now as opposed to 3, 5, 10 years down the road, I think is something that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, great point, Vince.
I'll throw in my 2 cents. Since Rick asked for the whole audience, I think that it's really important, and Bill, you touched on this a little when you were talking about conflict, and disagreements on the board. I think it's incredibly important to have people who can hear multiple sides of a conversation and come up with an answer and really leave your personal preference on an issue aside for the good of the community. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to judge or to point out in a person. But personally, it's one of the things I think is most important in a board member is representing the best interest of the whole community as opposed to yourself.
Right. Well, and I think as a corollary to that, it's when you're in a discussion, recognizing that people who are giving their time, and it's people who serve on the board, it's people who spend a lot of time writing to the board. If you're willing to devote that much of your time, you're not doing it because you were just bored. You're doing it because you're really trying to advance this community that we are fortunate enough to live in. And anybody who's willing to make that kind of commitment, whether they are serving on the board or are writing to the board, I think I give them a hell of a lot of credit. And I think their perspective is important because it all comes from a good place, even when we disagree about it.
George, are you still waiting to say something?
No, not really. I mean, I'll just echo what's been said. I mean, my view is the board works best when it has a good mixture of, I'll call it old and new. You put any labels on it that you want, but I think having a good mixture of viewpoints is extremely important for the board. The other thing I would say too is, I think if you're going to make a commitment to serve on the board, then you know the time is one thing, but you have to use the time wisely. I mean, I think you've got to be prepared to dig into some things that aren't fun to read, like the covenants, for example. I mean, they're archaic and they make your head hurt sometimes, but you really need to be willing to take the time to do that research and understand it. You can't improve it if you don't understand it or why it is the way it is. So I think you really have to be prepared to do some serious self-education.
It's a great point.
Yeah, there are a lot of good teachers around, so it's not that you have to do the course all remote and via Zoom, but I think George is onto something where, having that sense of just from a fundamental principle standpoint, and then in terms of some of the documents, how does this community actually work?
So I'll add a comment that, from my point of view of 4 years on the board and being here a long time, we have such a terrific staff and so many people and committees who are interested in doing things that one of the key things for the board is to sort out the stuff that's bubbling up from the staff and from the committees and the community generally. If you were hiring a chief executive for an operating company, you might want somebody who really had an agenda for what they wanted to do and what they were going to fix in the company over the next few years. So I think that if you've got an agenda of what you want to fix at Eastman, the board isn't the place to do it, because we're going to be pretty busy dealing with the stuff that bubbles up, sorting out the priorities, encouraging the good things, helping steer the things that aren't quite right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff coming from the staff and from the community.
Mm-hmm. Another question I'd ask folks, if you could think of one thing that either attracts you to being interested in working on the board or you'd like to see the board working on, what would it be? From the Boyce household, I'm not sure that's Gail, but you've been patiently listening. If you had one thing you'd like to see the board working on, what would it be? And
You're muted, Gail.
oh, it is Gail. I'm sorry.
It is Gail. She's just far away.
There you go.
Okay. I guess for me personally, it probably would be a little bit of attention to the percentages of owners and renters. I do know, I've been here now, I think 7 years, and I do go to Florida every year for a short time and have been around, and a lot of the communities seem to, have a little bit more attention to those percentages. And just from my own personal experiences, the renters are here on vacation to have a good time and good party, where the owners seem to really be the ones that take care of the place, look at the future and et cetera. So has there been any talk at all about looking at, because with the addition now of VRBO and all these rental sites, I'm even myself, and I happen to be in a condo over in West Cove. I get calls and emails all the time to rent my own place. And years ago, we didn't have that kind of invasion.
Right. Oh, it's a terrific issue. I wish I could give you a roadmap as to how you come to an answer on that issue, but I would tell you that it is something that we're doing some work on to try and figure out how we think about it. And there are a lot of competing priorities and views. I mean, you have a bunch of owners who need to rent their property in order to make it work. We have a neighbor up the street who they plan to retire here one day, but aren't able to do so yet, and rent their property out. These are longer term renters that usually take it up, but it's key to them being able to keep their home. So you've got that population. And then, like you say, we have a number of people who rent who are not responsible in terms of what they're doing. So it's a real maze to sort our way through, but the general manager, Steve, has already started doing a little bit of research on that. I have a second home that's a condo down in Boston. We have a different set of rules there in terms of what rentals can be and how long the rentals need to be. I suspect in Florida, I know communities down there, a lot of times that's how they deal with it, is the term of the rent. But it is something we're going to have to work on, and there are no easy answers on this one. You know, if you want something that'll make your hair hurt, it's the time we'll have to spend thinking about how we sort out the right approach to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. The other, which kind of ties in with, once people hear I'm on the nominating committee, and I'm also on the board at West Cove, that I often get the question or the statement maybe that, well, gee, I'm only here in the summer, or I go to Florida for the winter, I'm not here, I can't do this position because I'm not here full time. What is your take on that, or the board's take? Because I'm not clear on that myself.
Well, it's interesting. Rick and I have slightly different perspectives, but maybe not entirely different. You have to engage. Now, God knows, in the world of things being done remotely via Zoom, there are many more opportunities to engage using the technology that's available to us than we would have had 2-3 years ago. So that's a good thing. Just though, like people who work remotely, you can't mail it in and pretend like you're engaged and really not be available to take calls, answer emails, basically be involved as you would be if you were up here. I think it becomes more difficult if you're in a leadership position to be doing that remotely. I spend a chunk of my time in Boston. It's a little bit different because I can get back here for meetings. But I think it is possible to be able to do it remotely, but you have to be willing to sign up to the challenges that are associated with that and overcome those challenges by kind of doubling down on the time and effort you spend to network and engage with your fellow board members.
Are there some positions that you would say would be easier to go after if you're here part-time than others?
You mean in terms of the board or in terms of committee?
Board or the council, either, just in general, if somebody was looking to get really involved with the board or the council. I mean, I'm at a loss as to how to really advise them. I tell them, to start with their special places. But that's where I kind of got involved first, so I could, get grounded, because this is quite a governance here.
Right. Well, I would tell you that right now, although there's still some questions about how do we sort out the future of council going hybrid, but right now we've had great participation. We haven't had trouble getting quorums for the council, in large part because people can do it from wherever they happen to be, including, I address the council every quarter. I would say probably half the time I've been somewhere else, visiting my children or in a different location. So right now, the structure of that allows those jobs to be done quite effectively remotely. Those are quarterly meetings, and you can network back in quite effectively. There are any number of committees that are able to do it remotely. And again, if this technology works that we are testing right now, I think we could see a lot more of that going on. Again, it probably will become just like it is in the workplace. This is what Renee and I were talking about earlier this afternoon. Less about physically where you are and more about mentally your willingness to fully engage.
Okay, great. We're starting, though, in West Cove, just in our meetings. I think with COVID, everybody was home, and they had a lot less polls outside. So while this is, you just have the opportunity to get more engaged. And we said, wow, maybe we should think of doing a lot, continuing this Zoom rather than live, because we were getting really good participation. But I am finding, with other things too, that as everything has opened up and people are getting outside more and back to normal, that the Zooms are less participative.
So I also warn people not to judge that too quickly based on things opening up. It's also the summer, and you generally see a drop off in participation in the summer, regardless if there's a pandemic exiting or not. So you have to be really careful there, and I don't think we're able to judge just yet what the results are. Rick?
Well, it's a struggle.
I'd like a little piece of this question. The thing that's really important to me is that we make it possible for people to participate across a wide range of lifestyles and living patterns. I'll tell you that the good virtual connection with video, like we're enjoying right now, has really transformed things quite a bit. When I first came on the board, I go away for a month. And I'll tell you that the February board meeting was really tough when you're doing it on a conference call phone and everyone else is in the room. And it's just so much different like this. You see, I think it's really important that a seasonal person be able to participate on the board. And I think that that's quite possible. I'm personally, I'm a techie myself, and I'm personally committed to having this work so that we can enjoy face-to-face with virtual participants and have it all be slick. And so far, I like what I'm seeing.
Great. Thank you.
Bill, I forget your original great question that you posed to everybody, what they'd like to see the board working on.
Yep. Vince, what do you think?
I think some of the things that I had heard is making Eastman more appealing, making people want to come to Eastman more, so then there's no place else. So, Eastman's accessible, the homes are available with the renters and whatnot. I've heard people talk about wanting to leave Eastman, and the question goes to why. Why do you want to leave Eastman? Why did you move here in the first place? What has changed since you've been here to make you want to do that? So I think I don't have the answer to it right now. Maybe working on it if I get on the board. If I don't, who knows? But working toward making Eastman more inviting. Having that list of people waiting to get into Eastman, type thing. I love living in Eastman. I love it here, and it's, I moved here for a reason, and to have people again, say, well, I lived there, I didn't like it, I'm moving. Okay, tell us why so we can change it.
Yeah, I think one of the best parts of my job is 3 times, sometimes 4 times a year, we actually have a social for all the people who've just moved to Eastman. And it's really fascinating to hear their perspectives on why they moved here. And almost to a person, depending on what you hear, you can start to predict what people might actually, whether they're going to be happy here over the long term or not. You know, there's some people who moved here because they saw it as a lower cost alternative to living in Hanover or Lebanon or wherever it might be. And, you know, I feel bad for them because I'm not sure they'll ever fully be happy here. I mean, they're trying to manage their lives to a point that probably isn't in keeping with the entire community, because let's face it is more expensive to live here because we have a lot more amenities. So we have things like a pool and a lake and a golf course, and you can go down to a long list, which are reasons that the vast majority of folks moved here and think that they've come to a summer camp for adults. So, you know, the thing that's exciting about going to those coffees is the vast majority of people got the value proposition and are really excited to be part of that. The longer term question, though, is what can we learn from the people who choose to leave? And, you know, we've talked at times about doing a better job of trying to do exit interviews with them to gain that insight and that information. I think that could be and should be a priority for us. For instance, one thing that we know is there are a number of people that cannot live here as independently as they might have when they first moved here 15, 20 years ago. That might have implications about going to some sort of cluster housing arrangement. There's a group of people who are actually thinking about that and working on that. That may be another factor, maybe a little bit different than what you're hearing, Vince, but certainly something that would allow this to be a community that people could live in for a much longer period of time than they otherwise would if they start to get nervous about the ability to do some of the basic things that are tough to do when you're living on 3 different floors and you're a long way from everything. But you're absolutely right. Understanding what are those things that attract people here and how do we keep those going? How are we truthful and very direct in making sure people know what they're coming into? And then for people who do become disenchanted, what can we learn from that?
And Bill, just to, to kind of add on to that, one of the Facebook groups that I'm on is an Upper Valley Facebook page. And somebody who moved here recently posted a picture of the Eastman e-sticker on a car and asked, what do these mean? What are they for? And we were getting responses of, oh, that's elitist, entitled. So I guess that's part of the thing too, is how do we change the perspective of the people who don't live in Eastman, that we are not that type of community, that we don't walk around with our where we're drowned in a rainfall or something.
Right.
So
we need to get some bumper stickers that just say we're not Queechy or something like that.
something like that. So
I grew up here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a very big issue. Issue is the wrong word. It's something we need to constantly be focused on with Grantham. I mean, you see more Grantham than I do, but that certainly is something that bubbles up from time to time with Grantham. We initiated a conversation with the select board a couple months ago. We'd like to make that more ongoing. We had great synergy between the community and Eastman when it came to COVID. The volunteers here that were making masks for the community expanded that to all of Grantham, and that was a real hit. There are a number of things that happen down in Grantham that we advertise up here. We also advertise programs that are happening up here to the broader community in Grantham. I think there's a lot of room for that to continue to grow, and some of the mystique that, well, this is a private community and people aren't welcome here to be washed away. If we have the right people who are having conversations not only within our community, but within the broader Upper Valley and certainly Grantham. Other questions? Now, Renee, you can say that, I think what you want to say is, with the time that we're going to give you, you can get started on your board package, which is due on July the 13th. You're muted right now, by the way.
Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say, Bill. And if anybody has any questions while they're completing their packets, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am happy to answer any questions. Hopefully we made some tweaks to the packet this year, so it should be pretty easy to fill out, but I know that parts of it do get confusing. So please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, to Gail, to Lisa, who was on here. Brian Burke is also on the committee, as well as Brian Milsakis. Did I say it right, Gail? Yeah, Milsakis. So you can reach out to any of us for help, and we are more than happy to walk you through the process. The packets are due July 13th. From there, what the process looks like is that we compile all of the packets, and they are sent out to the community, who reads through them and then mails in or drops off their vote. And the 3 new board members will be announced at the September council meeting, which I believe is September 11th this year. What I will say is one of our biggest goals in the last couple of years has been that even though we've been blessed with having so many people run for the board, that there's not enough positions and too many candidates, which is the best position to be in. But we can promise that anybody who does not secure a seat, we will not let you off that easy. And we will have other spots waiting in the wings for you. So we don't want to turn around wonderful volunteers, and you all are already wonderful volunteers for joining us and being part of this conversation today. So thank you so much. And a huge thank you, Bill and Rick. Bill, final words?
Yeah, I would just say we would add Rick and myself, obviously, to that list if you have questions or things you'd like to talk about. On the darkest of days, I think both Rick and I would agree that we have thoroughly enjoyed the time we've spent on the board. It's intellectually stimulating. It gives you a feeling of giving back, which is something after a long career that I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to do. You know, it's a really good community that we get to be stewards of. I think, Renee, you might also mention in the past, I assume we'll continue to do this, we will have a forum for the community to meet board members. So just because you might not know a lot of people, there would be an opportunity for you to introduce yourself in a Zoom session that gives everybody a chance to see you in addition to the information that you share in your package. And, you know, putting together the package could seem scary. It really isn't. It's just an opportunity for you to share your thoughts on where you think this place would benefit from going in a directional standpoint. And the mere fact that you took the time out this afternoon to join us speaks volumes about your commitment to continuing to have this be a great community to live in. So thank you for that.
Definitely. And the community forum will be on August 21st. It's a Saturday at 9 a.m. I believe we're going to most likely do it virtually. Again, just so that the most number of people, unless, Bill, the technology that you guys tested for the board is ready by that point in time, we want to make sure that community members are able to join virtually. So we're going to do whatever format we need to in order to assure that. You will get questions in advance for that session, which I will give you the softballs that I will be moderating to you, but then it will be open to the community after that point. So there will be some improv going on as well. But it's always in great community spirit of that session. So it's actually a lot of fun. Any other questions before we sign off? All right, 7 minutes to complete your packet. I think you might need a little more time, but I'll be looking. You'll hear from me if I don't have them by this evening. Just kidding. No,
thank you all.
Thank you guys so much.
Pleasure.
And thank you, Bill and Rick, for taking the time as well. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
Our pleasure.
Night all.
Bye now.